side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. He had bronze armor on his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and his shield-bearer went before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? Are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. And if he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite in Bethlehem in Judah, named Jesse, who had 8 sons. In the days of Saul, the man was already old and advanced in years. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to the battle. And the names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab the firstborn, and next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul. But David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came and took his stand, morning and evening. And Jesse said to David his son, "Take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain, and these 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers. Also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their 1,000. See if your brothers are well, and bring some token from them." Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel who were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. And David rose early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper and took the provisions and went, as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the encampment as the host was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. And David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage, and ran to the ranks and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before. And David heard him. All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid. And the men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel." And David said to the men who stood by him, "What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? And who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And the people answered him in the same way, "So shall it be done to the man who kills him." Now Eliab his eldest brother heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, "Why have you come down, and with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle." And David said, "What have I done now? Was it not but a word?" And he turned away from him toward another, and spoke in the same way, and the people answered him again as before. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him, struck him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him with his beard, by his beard, and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God." And David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul clothed David with his armor, and put a helmet of bronze on his head, and clothed him with a coat of his mail. And David strapped a sword over his armor, and he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested it. Then David said to Saul, "I cannot go with you, for I have not tested them." So David put them on. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. And the Philistine moved forward and came near to David with a shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron, so that the wounded Philistines fell on the way from Shaaraim as far as Gath and Ekron, and the people of Israel came back from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their camp. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. As soon as Saul saw David go out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is this youth?" And Abner said, "As your soul lives, O king, I do not know." And the king said, "Inquire whose son the boy is." And as soon as David returned from the striking down of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" And David answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite." The end. So what do we remember from last week? What sticks out, reading it again, what sticks out from last week's talks?
We all have giants in our life that need to be slain.
That's fair.
I think the big thing that stood out for me was the Philistines. It wasn't just that they were evil, but they were insulting God, and that was what the real battle was about.
Yeah.
God's honor.
Glory of his name.
And that's, like extrapolating that to your own life, and in praying for people and whatever, like what are you really after? It's God's honor and God's glory. That's what needs to happen in these situations. And so often we just want, the difficulty to go away, right? Yeah. We want it to be easy for our kids even, right? But sometimes
Everything we do should be for the glory of God and to honor his name and reverence his name.
Yeah, even if we lose out.
Yeah.
Even if we're the big loser in the deal and God's the big winner. That's just the craziest calling that God gives us is think nothing of yourself. That's how far it's to go, is think nothing of...
Yeah, and even to proclaim God's message to the world is foolishness to the world, so we look foolish. present God to the world, but you know, it's His glory, it's His wisdom.
Yeah.
Well, I know, and you think about, okay, David, he's this little, basically, I don't know how old he was, and all these soldiers are just watching him, and he's walking around, you know, that's why his brother was embarrassed, you know, because he was doing this big talk thing, and thinking, who do you think you are?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how we are, like, just stumbling around as Christians.
Yeah. Yeah, God chooses the weak things of the world to confound the wise.
David's focus that let him approach the Philistines too. Like everybody was cowering for, he said 40 days, right?
Yeah.
And because they were focused on their strength and their might, and there was no way that they could conquer Goliath. That David was so focused on the Lord that it invigorated him, and
The naivety of youth.
and not even the naivety of youth, it was the knowing.
He
that
actually knew God.
He knew God, and he knew His power, and he knew the way that He saved him in the past. So he didn't even think twice about going against the Philistines.
It
His
just made
brothers
sense,
thought he had the wrong motives and just wanted to battle, but no, he was there because he knew the Lord and he wanted the Lord's name to be defended. And so, yeah, it strikes me because what we have our focus on definitely affects the way we act. So a 3-year-old can make me quite irritable, irritated, and unloving when I'm focused on her. And then when I'm focused on Jesus, it can change it, right? He can give us a different mindset.
This relationship was so healthy, he had confidence it was going to work.
Yeah, that's the part that sticks out to me is he was just so connected to God, that you could maybe say, that when he walked into that situation, he saw it in that light.
And the other people saw it.
Well, I kind of marvel that he killed a bear and a lion with a sling. I can't figure that one out.
That's pretty thick skulls, yeah.
If you could do that, Goliath would be nothing.
Probably the thing to not miss in this whole thing is that God set all this up. Like, this was a setup. But I do think that's important for us to remember, though, too, is, like, God set it up. Meaning, God set it up for His name to be hallowed in the situation that He set up for His name to be hallowed. So if we're kind of too quick with the lesson and draw it too quickly to, well, I'm going to go tell somebody something, or I'm going to immediately now react a certain way to some situation, it's a little bit risky to go there, because like David had to wait for this arrangement, for God's name to be challenged, and then for it to be defended. Like, it's part of picking the battles. I think that's one of the lessons we get out of this, is learning how to pick the battles that God's wanting to win. So, and then David got in there and he could have defended himself with his brothers. It was almost an opportunity to be distracted and get out of focus about what was going on. But he picked his battle. No, this is about the Philistines. So do we have that in us, that perception to know when God's setting up something for a big win for God? Do we have that kind of spiritual sensitivity that says, this is on its way to a battle, but I better zip it for now? Or this is the time, this is the place, this is God's Valley of Elah, and we're standing now for the Lord right now, and He's going to defend His name, and I just got to show up and do my part.
That's probably why it's very important to be led by the Spirit.
And there's that letting do, yeah.
Because you could easily jump out and do something in the flesh, and it's not God's timing.
Yeah.
Well, God does set things up like this, and I mean, the odds of him, again, going back to killing a lion and a bear is virtually impossible. But God must have given them the confidence by allowing them to have it.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing is accidental. Like, you know, he didn't go in there intending to kill Goliath. Everything was accidental, and he just went forward on the faith of God.
Yeah, I'm just showing up with cheese.
Plus, he didn't use the warfare, the battle armory that men use.
Typical, yeah.
He was just a plain, ordinary kid that used what God had provided for him. Just like Gideon, he had 300 men instead of how many hundreds of thousands of men. God just, so that then his God is glorified. It's not the weaponry, it's not the massive, it's a small war that it should be impossible. So then God is glorified.
Yeah, that's very clear. What about the encroachment of the Philistines in our land? Did that one stick out last week? The Philistines stick their feet in the land of Judah, Judah of Soko, verse 1. Did that one stick out and ring a bit?
Yeah.
But that's what the enemy always does.
Encroach.
Well, it sort of reminds me of, remember when you talked about when the Israelites were living in Babylon, and, you know, like the Babylonian ways, they're creepy. It's just subtle.
Yeah.
Well, and they were forcing it on them too, weren't they?
Yeah, but they were also kind of liked it.
Yeah, they
because
liked
it was
it, yeah, they
peace
would-
there, and
Yeah, they were already worshipping other idols in Israel,
Yeah.
and they went there and said,
just add a few. We'll keep worshiping God too, but
Right, yeah.
yeah, that's why we've got to be careful, because you can see what's happened over the past 100 years, where the culture is changing the church.
Right.
You know, and then at the standard the church was up here, and the culture, we try and keep the standard of the church just slightly above the culture. Then the culture goes even lower into depravity, and the church seems to come down a bit to it. But just stay just above it, and God's standards are way up here, and it's like we're allowing those things into, you know, his body when it.
A man-pleasing spirit kind of thing.
Yeah. You know, I'm not poking at it, but because it is important for this idea of creep, is the Willow Creek Church, Bill Hybels, this is a compliment to him. He, in the last couple of years, actually said that they needed to backtrack on their seeker-friendly church philosophy. They had written books and put out seminars on being seeker-friendly churches and accommodating the whole church to people who are in the category of seeker, which meant changing and dumbing down the Christianity that they were presenting through the church, the Christ that they were presenting through the church. And then he came back here in the last couple of years, after almost 20 years of walking through that whole time, and then saying, well, that was a mistake. We shouldn't have done that. So that's a compliment to him, that you can be humble enough to say, oops. But here's the Philistines, they creep, and you know, I wanted to make sure that we got that in a personal way. I think we understand it personally, because we all think personally. Yeah, Philistines can creep. They can start putting their feet and bringing Goliaths and keeping territory that's not theirs. And it can happen in our families. Then the toes of their feet start getting on a territory that doesn't belong. And I think it's important for us as a church to be thinking of these lessons in terms of the church family that we have. Like it is important that there be a gathering of God's people in the place that God has decided there to be a gathering of God's people. and even within us there will be Philistine creep. And yet it's not for our own sake that we would defend what God does with us. It's for His name's sake, and to identify that battle and say, no, we are gathered here for the name of the Lord. We've gathered on March 25 now? March 25. February 25. You know what I mean? We're in the future, guys. We gotta live in the future. Gathered February 25. To gather as an army, but I think we did it last week clearly enough to say, Son of David, come and start defeating some Goliaths. Son of David, come and start defeating some Goliaths. I don't mind saying that I'm a weak Israelite warrior. I don't mind that. I can handle that view of myself. I don't have to be David in this story. Jesus can be David in this story. But I think it's important for us that we say as a group in our gathering, Jesus, Son of David, save us. Son of David. And we're not going to put our armor on you. We're not going to tell you how to fight the fight. Did we catch that? We're not going to tell God, the Son of David, how he's going to fight his fight on our behalf for the name of the Father. He's going to fight it the way he's going to fight it. Do we have that kind of submission to show up and just gather, and then say, armor, sling, or stone? You know, later on, guess what? David started carrying swords. He did. He wore swords. But to prove that there's a God in Israel and that I don't need a stone and armor, I'm going to just use my sling and chop you in the head, right? That's what he says at the end of the battle, right? So I think that's exciting for us, isn't it? That God would come and save us with his own power, his own wisdom, his own way. And isn't God's way always through weakness?
Yes.
Oh, his way is always through weakness. Man, if we could have one wish, is to be able to push a weakness button. And I feel like, you know, you can't say this definitively, but you wonder if God's like, you know, you guys think you're weak, but actually you haven't seen the real weakness yet. You guys think you're so weak and humble. Wait till I show you my son's humility.
Yes.
Wait till I bring real weakness upon you so we can have real power. Because when Paul wrote that famous Bible verse, "May your power is made perfect in weakness," he was being afflicted by a messenger of Satan. I don't even know what that means, and he doesn't tell us. But he was feeling extremely supernaturally weak.
Yeah, it's like it's not I that lives with Christ in me.
Yeah.
It just makes you meditate on that. Like,
Yeah.
you really need Christ living through it.
Yeah. Which is that question I feel in my heart is, do I have that kind of weakness yet? Or am I still relying on self-strength in some capacity, self-wisdom in some way, that's inhibiting the power of God to be made perfect?
Well, God will just bring situations to show you.
And I wonder if that's his wisdom, as he brings the whole Philistine army to their doorstep and says, you guys can't beat a 10-foot tall guy. Here's a 10-foot tall guy, 10 feet tall, 125 pounds of armor, and a spear that he can throw, and you know he can hit what he wants, and it's 30 pounds. And a sword, but we don't know how big it was. But imagine a 14-year-old trying to chop a head off. One good shot, I just gotta get it in the air. And that's God's plan, is he saves out of weakness. He brings low to save greatly. How low are we willing? How low are we willing to go? Well, I don't like asking that question.
In the coming years, we may very well know.
Well, that's the question, yeah. That's the question.
Well, maybe that's why we have to get old, because we get weaker and weaker.
And now my knees are going out.
No, really, I've thought about that. You know, so I watch my parents age, and you know, just the frustrations with it. Yeah. You go back to weakness. You start out weak as a baby, and then you think you're kind of smart.
You know, the obvious one, we kind of mentioned it already too, is it was a victory for Israel. Everybody got to participate in the victory. Everybody got to plunder the camp, right? Everybody got to have the reward of the spoil of war. And the glory of chasing a Philistine who's running away. And
Well,
that's just fun, right?
Taunted you for that.
Yeah, get them back. All right, get them back. So everyone gets to feel like they were a victor. And I think that was God's plan. Because Jesus went to the cross and we get to feel like a victor. So that's definitely his wisdom. It's just to fight that fight, it really was the person who had the connection with God, not just the label of being one of God's people. Do we understand that? Like, it wasn't an Israelite, because to be an Israelite meant to worship God. It wasn't just being an Israelite that they showed up to the battle and it was won. It was a person who knew the God of Israel who was able to fight the fight and have the victory. And God distinguished David from all the camp in that by showing who really knew him and who just had a label. Now God wasn't being mean about it because he brought all of them into the victory. And he brought them all into the plunder. He brought them all the rescue from the battle and preserved the land. But he drew a distinction in the fight of who had the knowledge of the God of Israel and who just had the label of Israelite. Does that make sense? I think that's important because it's pretty quick to become, well, I'm a Christian, so God owes me X, Y, Z. And there's some value and truth in that. But if we start leaning on one, do we open up the door to, now I don't follow after my knowledge of God and have that personal vitality that David showed? Or do I trust my label, or do I trust Jesus? There is a difference. What about fighting? You know, Jesus, I just brought up this verse out of Matthew 10. Don't fear those who kill the body but can't kill the soul. How appropriate is that? Don't fear those who can kill the body but not kill the soul. Fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. But you, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny, and not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father? But even the hairs of your head are all numbered. So fear not, therefore. You're of more value than many sparrows. So everyone who acknowledges me before men, I will also acknowledge before my Father who's in heaven. And whoever denies me before men, I'll deny before my Father who's in heaven. And then this, don't think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Ouch. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake, fight. Let's keep it about David for a minute. Do you think David understood these concepts? Do you think David understood that concept from Matthew 10:28? Don't fear those who kill the body but can't kill the soul. Do you think David understood that one? He just marched into battle, fearless of his life. Do you think he knew that his father valued him after rescuing from the lion and the bear? He knew he was more valuable than a bird. What about shepherding? David spent all that time with the sheep, and he knew the way he felt toward the sheep. And then he writes Psalm 23, the Lord, you're my shepherd. David understood. Man, if God can take care of, if I can take care of the sheep by fighting a lion and a bear, how much more can God take care of me, his sheep, against this lion of Goliath? And all the battles that David would go on to fight. David understood that. And then absolutely, do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. Why did Jesus say that? That's just, why did he say that?
Because his message is so radical.
Yeah. Don't think that I came to bring peace to the earth. I haven't come to bring peace, but a sword. Does that hit anybody else just strange? Like, wow, God, what are you doing with this whole thing? So then it brings up...
Because
yeah.
he did come. It's funny that he says it that way, because Jesus did come to bring peace. Like, it was in the angel's proclamation of Christ, right? And then it's just that he brings his peace in a way that's not the way that we think peace would come with. It brings conflict too, because it's like it has to conflict with the world system. It's just God's.
Yeah.
He's funny. Not funny, but silence is that's good.
Well, if we can follow the David and Solomon story, Solomon, his name means peace. His name means peace. And absolutely, we see Jesus in the name of Solomon. He's the king of peace. He's the prince of peace from Isaiah. But who was Solomon's daddy? David. And how much war did David see in order to give his son a kingdom of peace? How much war did David... He couldn't even build the temple because he was a man of bloodshed. And then Paul in Hebrews 12, you have not yet shed blood in your striving against sin. Like, I just trying to do this with this whole concept, I think, is like, let's not fear the swords that have to be drawn. If the only person drawing a sword is the enemy, guess what's going to happen to the battle? It's going to be very one-sided. Armor of God passage. We need a sword. We need a sword. Not to fight people, fight for people. Not to fight each other, fight for each other. But without somebody stepping in and saying, this is defying the Lord himself. And I'm going to assert by confrontation God's right in these places, in these people, in these relationships, in the town. And then deal with whatever comes next. Because the moment you sit down and say no, someone who's saying yes is going to try to turn you no.
Kind of like when Stephen was being stoned, he's like, do not hold these things against them. That's how Jesus said to the Pharisees and all of them mocking him. He's like, forgive them. You know not what they do.
Yeah.
Same Jesus was in Stephen.
Yeah.
We're saying that through him.
Yeah.
And I want to be able to say that, when you go through really hard times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of strange, like, we've kind of bit off conflict in our homes, where other people who don't have Christ may probably never have conflict, and they just get a happy home. And that's why the Proverbs, I think, is filled with, don't be jealous of the wicked.
Right.
Because there was a lot to be jealous over, as far as Solomon could see in his day. We're not to be jealous of those who don't have Christ, especially when we're in the middle of conflict and lack of peace. We're fighting for something that's worth the lack of peace. It's worth it. And the truth is, if we're the body of Christ, then we're going to be shaped into a people who can hold the sword of the Lord together. That is, man.
I think it's a different kind of fighting. I think we have to understand how the Lord fights.
Yeah.
Because, it's hard for us because we think about fighting as the chopping, the bloodshed, all that kind of stuff. And that's really repellent. I grew up in a culture of peace. And so it's hard, these words. But you think about who does the fighting? It's the Lord that does the fighting, right? It's not us. And that's what the Lord tried to teach Israel time and time again. They, a lot of times their enemies they have bees that stung them, or something happened. They all got confused and they fought each other instead. So I don't know. It's complicated. It's not a simple concept.
Yeah.
This fighting concept.
The sword of the Spirit in the Ephesians passage is the Word of God.
Yeah.
So when you're wielding the Word of God, that is causing conflict.
That's causing conflict.
Yeah.
That's causing the conflict, and that causes the battle. Because people are putting their hand up and saying, you cannot say this is the only way. And so then you have people that don't want to acknowledge the Word of God, which you are wielding with your sword in your mouth, is truth. And so That can be in family, that can be in neighbors, that can be in the workplace, that can be in government. It's pervasive throughout. And so that's where the battle is. I mean, even in meeting a nurse on the floor and quietly ascertaining this is the believer, so waiting for everybody to come and then speaking to her and then kind of, okay, yeah, I thought. And she's like, I have to be careful. I have to be careful how I speak in the workplace. I have to be guarded because she's in a battle.
Because one thing we need in any of these cases is that spirit, that fight spirit that will say,
now is the time to
I'm
say.
going to speak. Yeah.
And I think, you know, she's just a young grad, so I mean, that's
sure,
going to come.
yeah.
That's going to come. But it's, again, it's like what you say, pick your battles. Pick the time that you speak.
Yeah.
Don't throw it all out there and then be able to be wiped off out of the job so that you don't have a place.
Yeah, right.
Where God needs you and when God needs you.
Yeah.
And when His time is.
Wisdom. Yeah, and it is that what we said. If it's been 40 days of the enemy blabbing, we're going to need to get that spirit back that says someone's got to put their feet down and say, no more of the enemy always blabbing, which will draw the conflict. This one's an important one for us, my friends. This one to me is a really important one. Not backing down from the conflicts. Not backing down from the... I'm calling it a fight, but I agree. It's a weird, convoluted definition of fight. Actually, lamb is probably the best way we fight. We fight by the lamb-like nature. We die. We allow ourselves to be defeated. That would be part of a larger study of what it means to fight spiritually. But to have that, I'm going to... Sorry. Because defeat for the lamb is death. Is not death, is choosing to save your life, which is what Jesus said. If you lose your life for my sake, you find it. That's the lamb.
Even in Christ's silence before His accusers, there was anger. You know?
Right.
He was silent and didn't defend Himself before His accusers. And there was anger back at that, because if you're the king, if you're whatever, save yourself, let's see it. And He was quiet before them. He never defended that in that time. I mean, in other places.
Yeah,
maybe,
He spoke
but,
other times.
Yeah,
Places,
but in that time before His death, He didn't.
I find it interesting how the roles are reversed. Very ironic. The roles are reversed from then till now.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You know, then it was that God was fighting or the Jews were fighting on the side of God. Now they're fighting against God. And we are the Philistines today. You know. Or we're the Jews, kind of. Yeah, I guess, yeah.
In the sense of God's people.
Yeah, like it's different how the roles are reversed.
I got another one here for us that we'll spend that bit of time on. We're going to wrap up in the last few verses. Go to 55, if you still got your Bible. If not, you can just hear it. So, 55. As soon as Saul saw David go out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as your soul lives, O king, I do not know. And the king said, inquire whose son the boy is. As soon as David returned from striking down the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? And David answered, I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. So, all you get is that, right? That's all you get. Is anyone else kind of like, what's going on here? Like, wouldn't Saul, we actually already saw it in verse chapter 16.
Talked to David, but he didn't ask him whose son he was at that point.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Because he was going to give him his honor.
either he was being forgetful or didn't pay attention or but it gets highlighted and it takes up the finale of the story of Goliath. This is interesting to me. I think it's going to give us a really good way to wrap this up and get a good point on it. It's a big deal whose son David is. It's a big deal whose son David is. It actually gets said many times. It gets said in chapter 16. Then it gets said again in 17 in verse 12. David was the son of an Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah named Jesse, who had 8 sons. Well, we already had that information from chapter 16, so it's repeated there. And then they could have left that out and just left it to be said here at the end of the whole David and Goliath story. But it's gotten said a couple of times.
Used for the lineage of Jesus.
You know, it's definitely good confirmation for his lineage. To show that Christ has the right line. But what did Jesus do when he was walking around Israel? Who did he always talk about? His Father. Jesus didn't want to be known just as Jesus Christ the Messiah. He wanted to be known as a son of his Father. Jesus wanted to be known as a son of his Father. Why is this important? I think it gives us a couple of really valuable nuggets. The first one is, Jesus' earthly father was a famous man who had a lot of money and ruled a huge property. Oh wait, no, wait. Jesus was born to a poor carpenter in a know-nothing town that had no respect, called Nazareth. David was born similarly, right? He's an Ephrathite of Bethlehem, a sheep family. He wasn't a man of great respect. Jesse wasn't a man of great respect. He wasn't a wealthy person. He didn't have great knowledge. They didn't know who he was. Oh, you're Jesse's son. Who's Jesse? Saul didn't know who Jesse was. Can I throw this out as a really big point? In our story, David moves from obscurity to prominence. In Jesus' life, he moves from obscurity to prominence. And if I think in terms of the land of Israel, what God's doing with his son always is he's moving him, his son, from obscurity to prominence. From someone people don't know much about and have much respect for, to someone you can't ignore. He's on every headline of every news in Israel. He's making the biggest waves. He's the most interesting person. I'm thinking for us, even as believers, this is really important, that we keep in mind God is moving Christ from littleness in us to prominence in us. From littleness, or whatever we have right now in our church, I'm not going to call it little, I'm just going to say whatever it is now, he's looking to increase it. That the name Christ, the name Jesus, the name of David, son of David, is going to grow if God's going to have his way. Christ will be known in his people. His name will be increasingly honored and respected by God. So let us be careful, I think this is the big lesson too, that we not allow Christ to slip into obscurity again. That we not allow the Son of David to go into any kind of obscurity among us and in us. That in our own value system of Christianity, with all of its many pieces and parts, that Christ not slip back into obscurity among the parts of Israel, parts of the land. Or does Christ have the prominent role? Is his name prominent and dare I say increasing, because Christ is the Lord of not just the land of Israel, He's the Lord of the whole earth. And so for the name of Christ to be increasing, He's going to eventually own the whole world. He doesn't own it yet. So we're still in that curve of increasing the name of Christ. We're still on that trajectory of Christ was obscure, He will be prominent, and in the earth, He's still on that path. And it is our honor, our duty, our mission that the name of Christ move from obscurity to prominence. How much, you know, I'm not going to say we sit and poke at other religions and churches, but when we watch liberalized churches, what happens to the name of Christ? What happens to the name of Christ in liberalized churches? Christ goes down, religion comes up. We just have got to be those people where we do stand. We take a stand. We put our feet in the place of conflict to say that the name of Christ will always have supreme prominence. Supreme prominence. And I would say even an increasing prominence, because He does not yet own the whole earth. And it's part of our opportunity and journey to help His name increase in prominence. Does that make sense? Does that click anyone? Who was David? He was the son of his father. He went from nobody to now, as we're going to read in these future stories, he becomes the man. And it happened to Jesus already once, didn't it? He showed up. Jesus got a good name. Jesus was the most popular person in Israel. And then He got rejected by the establishment. And the name of Christ was murdered. Doesn't that happen to David? Will we not see that in the story of David? The increase of David's glory, fame and glory in Israel, and then suddenly he becomes a threat. We're meant to see that. We're meant to see that. Oh, that Christ would never be under threat among us. Can I just say that? That's all I'm saying with this. We've got to say it. That Christ would always have His prominent place. And we do want Him to be king. We do want Him. Any other nuggets to grab out of this? You know the best response on that note? The Israelites, they did it in that first battle, is eventually they just rallied around David. They rallied around David. They got excited about David. They said, this guy just beat a giant on our behalf. How many giants has Christ beat? He's beaten Satan, death, and everything since then. And our honor, our place, and we are going to see this in the story, is to say, Son of David, take your place. Take your place. Over the land. And if I can just say it one time clearly, that is our mission in this town. Is that the name of Christ have prominence. He can use His sling. He doesn't have to use our shield and armor. But that is our mission. Is that the name of Christ get its place. Well, any other thoughts? Anything to say? Then we'll just praise God a little bit. God, may your name be honored as holy. May your name be honored as holy. May your name be honored as holy. God, in our homes, may your name be honored as holy. In our own hearts, may your name be honored as holy. In our church, may your name be honored as holy. And in our town, God, may your name be honored as holy. May there be respect for the name of the Son of David. God, you do fight our battles. How do you fight our battles? You supply angels, you supply Holy Spirit power, you give us the swords of the Spirit and the armor of God, you give us wisdom. You do fight our battles. Lord, you do go forth as a mighty warrior. Oh, we're glad to hear that, God. Man, we need you to fight some battles. Man, we need you to fight some battles. Does anyone have anything they want to pray to God right now as we wrap?
Father, I just pray for the town of Oak Lake, the people that live here, Father, that they would come to know the supremacy and the prominence of Jesus Christ. They would come to know the salvation and redemption that you have made possible for all people. Father, I pray that there would be a time of outpouring upon Oak Lake and this region, Father. I pray that we would all be moved by your Holy Spirit to cry out to you for that outpouring, Lord. Lord, that you do want to pour out on people. You do want to bring people back to you, Lord. You do want to save. You're a God that saves. You're a God that creates. You're a God that makes new creations out of corrupt mass. Father, you bring life where there's darkness. So I pray that for Oak Lake, Father. There's so many people here that go about their day, Lord. They don't even think about you. They don't know you. And God, we ask that you would come in your awesome majesty and your power to save, Lord. Not by our strength, Lord, not by our power, but by yours, Father, by yours, Jesus. I just pray that our hearts would be moved with compassion for the people around us, Father, that don't know you, that, God, that you can do a mighty work of salvation in this land. Lord, that you can make lives new. You can bring in a harvest, Lord. The harvest is truly plenteous, but the laborers are few. Father, we pray for Canada, Lord, that they're going in the wrong direction. They're going away from you. As each year goes by, Lord, the culture that we live in just becomes more and more just crazy. Father, we need the light to shine in the darkness. We need your Spirit to come and shake your church. Shake the church, Lord, out of the slump that it's in. God, may the cross be proclaimed across Canada like it used to be. Father, may the message of the gospel go forth in power to transform lives. All across Canada, I pray for that. Father, in this town, Lord, God, wake us up. Father, wake us up. There's people dying and going to hell every day, Lord. Are we moved to compassion for that? Do we feel your heart for those people, Lord? Do we cry out to you, Lord? For them? God, there's got to be a change. There's got to be a breaking, Lord. You've done it so many times in the past, Lord, where you've poured out all over the world, Lord. You've poured out your Spirit, Lord. We need that in this day, Lord. In the dark times that we live in, Lord, we need it. We need your Spirit. We need redemption and salvation to come to this land. Pray that, Lord, and that we would seek you. Lord, You're waiting at the door, like you're there. You're willing. You're just looking for people that want to cry out to you. Bring change. May we not get comfortable in our Christianity. There's always more of God to know. That we would really just not get comfortable where we're at. You know, there's more. We all have a heart after His heart.
God, I just feel you making things more and more serious among us. You're making things more and more serious, so that we are not able to disguise things. Not that we ever really wanted to, but you're just making the seriousness that much more pronounced. God, we want to respond with seriousness too. We want to have, as Peter said, a sober spirit about your will and your way. So God, we don't ignore the sober spirit. We don't act like laughing is a good alternative. No, Lord, we understand that this is a sober time, Lord, as the world marches where it's marching and you're marching where you're marching, and it's all very real, very eternal. God, we want to do our part, individually and as a group. We want to do our part for your kingdom to come. We want to do our part for your will to be done. We want to be engaged. We want to be active. We want to be part of it, Lord. So move in us by spiritual vitality, Lord, and by prayer and by the Word of God. You can ready a people. You can ready a people to be a witness to each other and then to the outside world. You can do it, God. We're asking you to do that. Ready a people. Ready a people for your name's sake. We'll wrap it up there. So, amen, Jesus. Amen. Just to offer an opportunity, if you're feeling like more praying and more seeking of the Lord would be good. I'm going to be here Friday night with the guitar and the willingness to seek God. So if you want to show up Friday night, I think Chris and Rachel got some songs that we'll prep to. I figure maybe 7. And the supper hour, and then